Before I tell you this story, let me give you a glimpse of what's ahead. I never imagined a few quiet words from my boss, on a morning that started like any other, would shake something loose in me that I didn't even know had settled. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it stayed with me for years, like a song that you hum without realizing. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was late October, the kind of morning where the sun has to work a little harder to lift the mist off the pavement, and everything smells faintly of damp leaves and brewed coffee. I remember because I had just switched out my summer heels for my sturdier boots, polished, low-heeled, good for walking the downtown sidewalks without slipping on wet stone. I'd worked at the firm for 9 years by then. Not quite a lifer, but long enough to know the rhythms. My title said Executive Coordinator, but really I was a fixer. I knew where the good pens were hidden, which clients preferred still over sparkling, and how to calm a room before the boss stepped in. That morning I was early, as usual. The office was quiet, only the low hum of the heating and the faint scratch of someone's chair rolling on the hallway carpet. And then I heard him, David, my boss. He had that voice that didn't need volume to be heard, always calm, always paced. He must have heard me setting down my bag at my desk, because his door creaked open just enough for his head to peek out. Elaine, can you come in for a second? It wasn't unusual. I'd popped into his office 100 times before, usually with schedules, reminders, or the occasional cup of tea when I could tell he needed something warmer than caffeine. He didn't say much at first, just gestured for me to sit. His office smelled of cedarwood and something faintly citrus. Whatever candle he had burning always gave it a calm feeling, like a space where nothing urgent could touch you. He looked tired, though. Not physically, but in that way someone looks when something's been pressing on them for a while. I was thinking about something this morning. He started, folding his hands on the desk, and I realized I've never asked you what brought you here. I blinked. You mean, to the job? No, he said, then gave a quiet smile. Here, to this point in your life. It was such an unexpected question that I didn't answer right away. And maybe that's why it hit me the way it did. It wasn't a question you throw around in boardrooms or break rooms. It was personal, gentle, like someone asking where the scar on your hand came from, not to judge, just curious, like they saw something others had overlooked. I told him about my early years, how I'd once studied to be a teacher, how I'd followed my then-husband to a new state, thinking we'd build something solid. How after it ended, I needed work, and the firm had offered a kind of steady heartbeat I didn't know I needed. He listened, really listened. Not the polite kind of nodding that people do while glancing at their phones or watches. His eyes stayed on mine, and something in his expression told me this wasn't just a passing curiosity. I've worked beside you for almost a decade, he said, and I don't think I've ever told you how much I admire your steadiness. You make things feel less fragile. That word, fragile, landed somewhere deep, because I'd spent so many years trying to appear anything but. Strong, capable, polished. Fragile was for people who didn't survive what I had. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said, "Thank you." But the truth? I thought about those words all day, and that night, and the next, not because he'd complimented me, but because he'd seen me, in a way that caught me off guard. And maybe that's what this story is about. Not romance, not grand gestures, but the moments when someone chooses to see us, not just for what we do, but for who we are when no one's watching. There's more to that morning, and what came after. But for now, I'll leave it here. Let me know what you think in the comments. Has someone ever said something simple that stayed with you? And if you want to hear what happened next, well, you know what to do. I didn't sleep much that night. Not in a dramatic, tossing and turning way, but in that quiet sort of restlessness that comes when your mind keeps replaying a scene, trying to figure out what it meant. His words, "You make things feel less fragile," kept echoing, not because they were poetic or clever, but because they felt true. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. I was lonely. Not the kind of lonely that comes from being single or from quiet weekends, but the kind where you forget what it feels like to be seen. The next morning I showed up to work the same way I always did. Coffee in one hand, scarf wrapped tight around my neck, keys jingling in my coat pocket. But everything felt just a little different, like a film had been lifted from the world. Not in a romantic way, just clearer, sharper. I passed David in the hallway around 10 a.m. He was walking back from a meeting, his usual calm expression in place, but when he saw me, he slowed. "Morning, Elaine," he said with a nod. And I said it without thinking. "Thank you for yesterday." He gave a small smile, almost like he was relieved I brought it up. "I meant it," he said. "It's rare to find someone who holds people together without needing the credit for it." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just smiled back, and we both moved on. But something shifted in our dynamic after that. Small things. He'd linger a little longer when we spoke. Ask how my weekend was, really ask. I found myself opening up more, not out of obligation, but because it felt safe. We started having coffee together in the mornings, not every day, but often enough that it became a quiet ritual. 10 minutes before the rest of the office filled up, we'd sit across from each other in the break room. The room always smelled of dark roast and toast, and the windows faced east, letting the light in soft and golden. Those conversations weren't deep, not at first. They were about music, the weather, books we'd read. But slowly, the layers started peeling back. I told him about my grown daughter in Oregon, and how we only really talked once a month, but were trying to be closer. He told me about his late wife, not in a dramatic reveal, but casually, like he trusted me enough to mention her. She'd passed 4 years earlier from a long illness. He didn't dwell on it, but the way he said her name, Karen, held weight. You could hear the love still resting in it, quiet and undisturbed. And that's when I understood him better. Why he was calm. Why he moved through the world the way he did. He wasn't trying to avoid pain. He had simply made peace with it. One Friday afternoon, the office was quieter than usual. People had trickled out early for the weekend, and a soft drizzle had started outside, painting the windows in slow-moving streaks. I was finishing up some invoices when I heard that now familiar knock on my cubicle wall. "Got a minute?" He didn't need to ask. I stood up and followed him to his office. He had 2 chairs in front of his desk, but this time he didn't sit behind it. He gestured to the window-side chairs instead. "Let's sit over here," he said, picking up his mug. I remember the view that day, gray sky, glistening sidewalks, the occasional umbrella bobbing by like a floating lily pad. We sat in silence for a moment, and then he said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "Do you ever feel like life just settled around you? Like you didn't choose it, but you ended up in it anyway?" That question, it landed like a soft thud in my chest. "All the time," I said. And then, for the first time in years, I said something I hadn't said aloud. Sometimes I feel like I disappeared when no one was looking. He didn't look away, didn't flinch or try to change the subject, just nodded slowly. "Me too," he said, "but I see you now. I know how that sounds." But in that quiet office, with the soft patter of rain and the glow of the desk lamp beside us, it didn't feel romantic. It felt true. Like we peeled back a layer neither of us knew we still had on. We didn't hug, We didn't touch. We just sat there, two people in their middle years, acknowledging that something had shifted, not between us exactly, but within us. And as I left his office that day, I found myself smiling, not because something dramatic had happened, but because I felt lighter, seen, recognized. And for the first time in a long while, I wondered if this part of my life, this chapter I thought was just coasting, was actually just beginning. The weekend came and went quietly, like most of mine do. A grocery run, a walk through the neighborhood trail, folding laundry while some old jazz record played low in the background, but everything felt just a bit different. It's funny how a single moment, a single sentence, can make the ordinary feel like it has a heartbeat again. I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation by the window. I see you now. That wasn't the kind of thing people said unless they meant it. Monday arrived with the usual stack of reports and the predictable buzz of a new week. But when I walked into the break room that morning, David was already there. 2 mugs sat on the table. One had a small post-it on it, for Elaine. It wasn't the coffee. It was the thought, the quiet message in the gesture. I sat down across from him, and we sipped in silence for a minute. Comfortable silence, like old friends who didn't need to fill the air to feel connected. I thought about our talk, he said eventually, looking out the window. I don't know why I never said any of it before. I guess. Maybe I thought people our age didn't need to be reminded they mattered. I smiled gently. We need it more than ever, I think. There was a pause, not awkward, just full. Do you ever wish things had turned out differently? He asked. I looked at him, studying the lines near his eyes, the way he folded his hands when he asked hard questions. I used to, I said, used to wish I'd stayed in teaching, that I hadn't followed someone else's path, that I'd spoken up more, chosen differently. And now, I took a breath. I think I've made peace with where I am. But I'm also realizing maybe it's not too late for different choices, even small ones. He nodded slowly. That's what I've been thinking too. That morning, something unspoken passed between us. Not a confession, not a decision, just recognition. Like we both understood that while we couldn't go back and change the story behind us, we still had time to change what came next. That week we started talking more. Not in secret, not in whispers, just openly. When the office cleared out for lunch, we'd walk together to the little cafe around the corner. Sit in the booth by the window and talk about everything and nothing. Growing older favorite books, how strange it was to feel both invisible and wise at the same time. One day he said something that caught me by surprise. I used to think I had to be strong for everyone else. Keep it together. Never show the cracks. I nodded. I know that feeling. But you, he said, then paused, choosing his words carefully. You remind me that there's strength in softness, in kindness, in just showing up. I didn't know how to respond. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with something gentler. Appreciation, maybe even hope. People in the office started to notice, of course. The glances, the quiet smiles exchanged in passing. But no one said anything, and neither did we. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't inappropriate. It was just real. One evening, as we both stayed late to finish up a deadline, the office fell quiet again, just like that rainy Friday. He looked up from his desk and said, "You ever think about starting over?" The question floated in the air between us. Not in a dramatic way, he added quickly. I don't mean selling everything and moving to a cabin in the woods. I just mean taking your life back, bit by bit. I looked at him, the way his brow furrowed just slightly when he was being vulnerable. And I said, maybe I have. We didn't make promises. There were no grand declarations, But something settled between us that night, a shared understanding that sometimes starting over doesn't mean leaving everything behind. Sometimes it means choosing to be fully present with the life in front of you. We left the office together, stepping into the crisp autumn night. The city lights blinked quietly above us, and the air smelled of distant fireplaces and turning leaves. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it stretch out between us, easy, warm. Because sometimes the most powerful moments are the quietest ones. And this one, it was just beginning. I used to think change had to be loud. Some dramatic moment where the curtain gets pulled back and suddenly everything's different. But what I've learned, what this whole experience with David taught me, is that the most meaningful shifts often happen in the quiet. No fireworks, no speeches, just a soft turning of the page. It had been a few weeks since that night we left the office together. We kept our morning coffees, our easy walks to the café, and our end-of-week check-ins when the world seemed to slow down just enough to feel something deeper. I started noticing small things in my own life. I was standing taller, smiling more. I didn't rush out of the office just to be alone in my apartment, and I'd started calling my daughter more often, just to talk. I even bought a new coat. Not out of necessity, but because I saw it in a window and thought, why not? David noticed too. One morning, while we were watching the sunrise filter through the break room blinds, he looked at me with that quiet intensity of his and said, "You've changed." I raised an eyebrow. "For better or worse?" He smiled. "You're more yourself." That sentence stopped me, because he was right. Somewhere in those weeks, I had started peeling back the layers I'd built up over the years. Not all at once, but enough that I felt like I was finally living my life from myself, not just through it. Then came a day I'll never forget. It was a Thursday, a dull gray one, the kind where even the sky seems tired. I had a meeting that morning that ran long, and by the time I got back to my desk, there was a small envelope sitting on my keyboard. No name, just my name in handwriting I recognized immediately. David's. Inside was a simple note. "There's a bench in Lincoln Park I walk to sometimes when things feel heavy. I'll be there at 6, if you'd like to join me." I stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't demanding. It was a door, quietly opened, waiting to see if I'd step through. At 5:45, I left the office. I walked down the familiar streets, my breath visible in the cooling air, boots clicking softly on the pavement. The park was nearly empty, just a few late joggers and an old man walking his dog. And there he was, sitting on the bench beneath the large maple tree that was just starting to lose its leaves. He looked up when he saw me, smiled, and just like that, I sat down beside him. We didn't speak for a while, just sat there, watching the golden leaves spin slowly to the ground. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly. "I wasn't sure either," I replied, equally quiet. And then he turned to me, not with intensity, not with expectation, but with that same quiet understanding that had marked every part of this story. "I think we're allowed to want more," he said, "even now, even at this stage of life. Not just comfort, but connection. Not just routine, but something that feels real." I nodded. I want that too. And in that moment I realized it didn't matter what came next. It didn't matter if this turned into something more or stayed exactly as it was. What mattered was the honesty, the presence, the way we were finally living fully in the spaces we'd once just moved through out of habit. We sat there until the street lights flickered on and the city began to hum again. Then he stood, held out his hand, not in a grand gesture, but in a simple offering. And I took it. Not because I needed saving, but because sometimes the most powerful act of courage is letting someone walk beside you when the path starts to change. That was 3 years ago. We're still walking. still having our morning coffees, still talking about books, music, memories, and all the little things we once thought didn't matter. And every so often, he'll still say, "I see you." And I'll smile because I finally do too. So wherever you are, if this story touched something in you, something maybe you thought had gone quiet, let me just say this. It's not too late. Not for connection. Not for hope. Not for beginning again, even if you're already halfway through the book. If you've ever had a moment like this, or if you're hoping for one, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story too. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Because sometimes, a few honest words at the right time can stay with us for years, just like his did.